Welcome to this Talks at Google in our Seattle office. Today we have Dr. Brett Finlay joining us. Since about 200 years ago, when humanity first discovered microorganisms, we've pretty much tried our best to get rid of them. And while the number of cholera-infested wells has gone down, the risk for other diseases like asthma has actually gone up. And recent science has shown us something that we've kind of started feeling in our guts, pun intended, that our oversanitized world and our attention to hyper-cleanliness is actually affecting our children's health in a not so good way. So Dr. Brett Finlay is a professor of microbiology and immunology at the University of British Columbia, where he has published just under 500 papers. I think we're like, 4 short of 500 we talked about? Yeah. And has enjoyed international recognition for his work. He led the team that sequenced the SARS genome and then developed the vaccine for it. He plays a jazz saxophone. He's got more awards than I know how to pronounce, but he is most notably an officer of the Order of Canada, which is Canada's highest civilian recognition. It's kind of like being a knighted. And his latest book, Let Them Eat Dirt, is now being translated into 11 languages. So let us welcome Dr. Brett Finlay.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you all for coming. I mean, she's already got half the talk done, so it's perfect. So, yeah, that's kind of the concept I want to discuss today about, we will talk about kids, but I'm also going to talk about microbes affecting, not just kids, affecting people of other ages, including the elderly and other ages. So my career, I've worked a lot on diarrhea, Salmonella and E. coli. So I warn you, I have a perverse sense of humor. That's why we're restricted for fecal content here. So, let's start when you think about, what's important to this world. And, I hope you're all sort of starting to think, yacht, island place, diamond ring, whatever. But, really when it comes right down to it, in terms of society, the important things are kids, because they're really our future. So, picture of kid, right? And nice, cute baby. By the time I end this talk, I want you to think of kids more like this, coated in microbes. So, as Maria said, that we've known there's microbes in and on us for a long, long time. So Andy van Leeuwenhoek was in the Netherlands, and he made these textiles. But he was a passionate lens grinder. He liked making magnifying glasses so we could look at his fabrics and dyes. And he got so good at polishing these lenses, he basically built microscopes. And like any good scientist, what do you do when you build a microscope? You look at things, right? So he started looking in rainwater. And then he did a fascinating experiment where he actually swabbed out his mouth and his teeth and then held up the microscope. And he saw all these animalcules, all these little wriggly things in there. And basically, he made this stunning observation that there's more microbes that he could see in his mouth than all the people living in Holland, which is where he lived. And this is 330 odd years ago. And no one believed him, all the crazy Dutchmen. But over time, he kept writing all these letters to the British Academy, and they just throw them out. And finally, they sent someone to actually look, and holy smokes, he was right. And that's when microbiology was discovered. So we know for a long, long time that microbes play a big part in this world. And just because you can't see them doesn't mean they're important. I mean, they basically were here long before us. They built the oxygen that we breathe. This world didn't have any oxygen until they came online. And we only think about the big ones, the plants and animals, which are actually just a tiny portion of the tree of life that we see here. And they were here long before us, they're going to be here long after us. There's a lot of microbes of a lot of different kinds in this world. Okay, they discovered these things 330 years ago. They had no idea what these microbes do. It was a neat novelty. You could find these wriggly things all over our bodies and things. Then these two guys came along, Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch. One German, one Frenchman. So they hate each other, right? They're competitors. But what these two guys did, and their teams and other people in the world, is they basically showed that microbes actually cause infectious diseases. And that was a big finding, because up until then, they had no idea what caused, there was all these thoughts that maybe it's bad air, swamp gas. No one knew how infections work. So these guys showed that things like, cholera caused disease and anthrax and tuberculosis. Then Louis Pasteur also showed that if you cooked these things, you killed them, pasteurization, that's where it comes from, you couldn't transmit the disease anymore. So this is 125 years ago, and this was cool. This means that if we killed these microbes, we wouldn't have disease, right? So society went on this huge kick to basically get rid of microbes. And, this is World War II, the antibiotics were invented. These things were amazing. You could actually save lives by these antibiotics added to bacteria, and they would actually then start to lyse the bacteria and actually kill these things. We brought in sanitation. We started getting rid of the rats. We had garbage collection. And, we went on this bandwagon that let's get rid of these microbes because they're causing these diseases. And, we've got to this extent now that, this kills 99.9% of bacteria. Yay, right? We can get rid of these things with these antibacterial things. And it worked beautifully. In the 1914 to 20 era, 30% of kids less than 1 year of age died of infections. Now, less than 0.1% do. So it worked. Clean is great. And you can look at pretty much any infectious diseases you want. There's a bunch of them listed here. This is 50 years of humanity. And these infectious diseases goes down. We have vaccines. We have antibiotics. We've cleaned up our world. And so, as I told you, I worked on infectious diseases, right? I look at this one curve. This is not a growth industry, right? I'm in trouble here. Got to find something else to do. So this is actually only the first half of the curve. It's the second half that I think is so telling about society. So again, the same 50 years, look around the world. What do people have now? They've got asthma, they've got diabetes, they've got obesity, they've got inflammatory bowel disease, the Western society kind of diseases. What has happened in 50 years? Because that's, 2 genetic generations of humans? It takes 100 generations to really get genetic changes in the population. So we've not evolved in 50 years. We've done something to our world. And so the concept I'm going to try and get across is we've actually gotten too clean. And actually, you will start to see these microbes are actually influencing the diseases that affect us on a daily basis. So, back to microbes. You're more microbe than you are human. Students are pissed off when I tell them that, but the number of microbes in and on you outnumbers the number of human cells. There's more microbes on you. They contain 15 times more DNA than Homo sapiens in you. So these microbes have a big influence on us. And the reason we start to know this and start to understand this is new sequencing technologies have allowed us to characterize these microbes without having to streak them on a plate and then grow them. So, in the mid-2000s, the Human Genome Project came online, and that was a massive sequencing project to sequence the human genome. And they daisy-chained all these sequencers together, and the world got together. We actually sequenced the human genome. That was a huge milestone in science. We can now know what the genetic coding of humans are. But the problem is they spent all this money sending up all these sequencers and training all these people. And once these guys finished the human genome, they sort of looked at each other. What are we going to do now, guys? We better find something. And someone said, let's sequence microbes. There's lots of them. We'll be sequencing forever, and we'll keep our jobs. So that turned into what's now known as the Human Microbiome Project, which is to sequence basically all the microbes in and on us. And it's been a stunning generation of data. It just generates phenomenal amounts of data of sequencing all these different microbes. And we're learning all sorts of things about them. There's a heck of a lot in them. There's 100 trillion microbes in your body, on your body, 10 trillion in the gut. To put that in perspective, tip of your little finger, cut that off, that's about 1 gram. Let's pretend it's feces. I told you I'm going to be gross here. 1 gram of feces contains more microbes than all the people in the world. So you can marvel at that tomorrow morning when you go to the can. There's a lot of microbes there. And, we really started to realize this. I was bored one night. And so I basically decided, I brushed my teeth really well. Then I swabbed out a cheek cell, much like Leeuwenhoek did. And then I put it on a microscope and I stained it. And what do you see? You see this gorgeous, beautiful cell. That's me, right? Nice nucleus and cell and everything. But look at all the microbes stuck to it. That's just normal mouth, and any of you can do this experiment. Your mouth are full of these microbes. They're sort of all different sizes and shapes. So where are all these critters? They're basically wherever your body is exposed to the environment. So they're on your skin, they're in the oral cavity, for example. the gastrointestinal tract, they basically increase the numbers as you go down, and by far the highest numbers of microbes is in the lower bowel and lower intestine. And there's no air there, it's anaerobic, and that's where they live. Urogenital tract, there's microbes there, and each of these places is a different environment. So each of these places have different microbes. The microbes on your armpit are going to be very different, which is wet, than your scalp, which is dry. So each of these places in the body has these different microbes. But what we're learning is that actually everyone has a unique composition of microbes. Genetically, we're 99.9% the same. We're very, well, other than a chromosome for male and females, we're very, very similar. But we're not. There is no single microbe that is found in all people around the world. And each person is at best 50% the same as someone else. So each of you has your own unique microbes. And so when we talk about things like personalized medicine, I argue we should talk about the microbes because that's what's really different between people. So what do these things do over life? Well, that first magnificent moment when you're born, your mother gives you your very first birthday present, which is a big bolus of fecal and vaginal microbes. Gross, but it's actually really important. That's when you kickstart your body for these microbes. Then as the kid inhales and eats these things, you increase the number of microbes in there. And then it sort of bounces around in early life, and then it sort of hits a kid microbiome. And that stays pretty constant until you go through puberty, then the hormonal changes give you an adult microbiome. Your microbiome, from since you finished puberty till really 65 or so, is pretty constant. Unless you do something like move to another country, become a vegetarian, swear off alcohol. It changes if you change your environment. But if you live the same, your microbes stay the same. And at the other end of the bookend of life, post 65, your microbes fall off a cliff. And we're just starting to realize that actually there's a lot of interference with these microbes in terms of aging. And there's some hope that we can actually influence aging, because if we can improve the microbes as you age, maybe we'll do this. Okay, so we're filled with microbes. Big deal. Do we need this to live? Yes, you do. Microbes are essential for life. So the experiment's been done in both people and animals. Let's start with this guy named David Vedder. He was a kid many years ago in California. Before he was born, they knew he would not have an immune system. He didn't have it. And without an immune system, you die. Pretty simple. So what they did is they birthed him by cesarean section, so you can actually sterilely take the kid out, and then put it in a sterile container. You only feed them sterile food and water. Now, he would die, except that they then fed them essential vitamins, because that's microbes make these things. And he can sort of live. And he basically spent 12 years of his life inside this bubble. He became known as the bubble boy. He then died at 12 of an infection. But so they were able to keep him alive by giving these key things. But the experiments we do in animals are very similar. We do the same things. We call these things germ-free animals. That's just code for microbe-free. And studying these things, we're learning that these microbes affect how the brain develops, how the gut develops, how the immune system develops. These are normal pieces of us that we need to develop normally. And these germ-free animals, they are really strange in terms of how they actually develop. Okay, we need them to live. Do they have any effect on disease? This is where it gets really interesting. Take a look at this list of diseases here, all the some of the Western society diseases. All those diseases listed there, the microbes in the diseased patient are different than the healthy ones. That doesn't prove it's causing the disease, but there's this association. And in some cases I'll tell you about, there actually seem to be contributing significantly to the disease. Okay, they're somehow involved in these diseases. Can we use that therapeutically? The answer is actually yes. You can do a fecal transfer. I tried calling a number, but it didn't answer. Excuse me. So there's this infection called Clostridium difficile. You hear it called C. diff. So let's pretend you're old, you're going to the hospital, and you're going to have, say, a hip transplant. The surgeons fill you up with antibiotics. What do antibiotics do? They carpet bomb the microbes. The idea is to get rid of the microbes, so if the surgeon actually slips with a knife or whatever, you don't get infections. So it's to block the infections. The problem is you're killing the good ones with the bad. And what that does is it creates a niche for this C. difficile to crawl in. So if it's competitive in the gut, which it is, it's very competitive, it's hard for microbes to come in. But if you get rid of all these microbes with antibiotics, it crawls in. And this has been a big cause of death in many, many people They go to the hospital for an operation and they die due to this. So this is a disease caused by antibiotics. So how do you treat it? They give them antibiotics. Well, that treats maybe 20% of this basically what can be a fatal disease. So then someone reasoned, well, if we could somehow replenish the feces in the gut where these microbes live, we might be able to boot it out and it couldn't then cause disease. So they actually did fecal transfers. You can do this two ways. You can nasal gastric tube down here or enema from the other end. There's even YouTubes out there how to DIY. Do not do this yourself because you perforate your bowel, you will die. But all it takes is a blender, according to these videos. But the neat thing is, at least with this disease, it cured 94% of these people by simply putting healthy feces from a different person into a diseased person. That's fantastic. That means we can actually start to think about treating diseases by changing the microbes. So let's spend a little bit more time talking about kids, because this is where the microbes seem to have a major influence. And I've already said, as a kid is born, the microbes kind of bounce around the first 2-3 years of life. Then about 3 years or so, the microbes are pretty stable for their childhood. Well, I've already alluded to this, that one of the key roles of these microbes early in life is to help our immune systems develop normally. Germ-free animals, their immune systems are really whacked. And what we realize, there's several studies now coming out that really help the immune system develop a balance so it knows which way to go, because it goes too far, it'll go allergic, for example, or autoimmune disease type things. And so they're really key for how this develops. So I'll tell you a story that came out of our lab, and that's dealing with asthma. When I was a kid, nobody had asthma. We had one kid in the school that had asthma, so they must have been mutant, right? Because they had a puffer, and when kids are weird, they got to be mutants kind of thing. And yet now, you go to the playground, kids take a puff out of the puffer and passes to a friend, who then passes down the line of the slide, right? 20% of kids have asthma, and that's just in a short 2-generation time period. So when you look at asthma worldwide, what you see is it's what we call a developing country disease. We see it in Canada and the US, we see it in the UK, we see it in Australia. These are the hyper-developed countries. So it's associated with something changes in the world. So there's all sorts of hypotheses. What is triggering asthma? What's this doing this? Is it due to air pollution, exposure to certain things? And there's obviously a lot of work and interest in this area. But we certainly know it's gone way up in a few years. So here's a few things that basically will affect your outcome of asthma. If you live on a farm, you have a 20% less chance of getting asthma. And I love this picture. Can you imagine riding a chicken? I mean, this kid's got to have a great grin on their face. Okay, so living on a farm decreases asthma. If you're born by cesarean section, the simple fact of how you come into this world gives you a 20% difference, 20% more risk than if you're born vaginally. Asthma doesn't kick in until 5 years later. How on earth does how you come into this world affect how you actually are going to come out? But we know the microbes in C-section kids are different than the microbes vaginally. The ones that are vaginally, they have the mother's vaginal microbiome, which is important for breaking down breast milk. The C-section kids, the microbes is much like the mother's skin, because that's what the kid is exposed to, breastfeeding and other skin contact there. Okay, there's that. If you have antibiotics in the first year of life, you again have a much higher rate of asthma, and this has been now really well documented. What do antibiotics do? Affect microbes. And finally, if you're breastfeeding a child, you again have a reduced rate of asthma. So what do all these have in common? Obviously, my hypothesis is microbes, right? So the way I got into this is we had been using antibiotics to affect diarrheal outcomes in our mouse models of diarrhea. And I came home one night, I was talking to my wife Jane, she's a pediatrician, infectious diseases doc. I said, hey Jane, if we treat these mice with antibiotics, we can shift the microbes and affect their diarrhea. And she sort of looked at me and said, Brett, that's interesting, because there's these neat studies coming out on the use of antibiotics early in life affecting asthma. And for whatever reason, that comment stuck with me. And being the good husband, you don't believe the wife, right? So you go and look it up. And guys, we all know wives are right. Of course she was right. But I couldn't find the experiment that basically proved that microbes were causing this asthma. There's all these correlations, but are they proving it or not? So, well, being a scientist, what do? We do the experiment, right? So I had this bright young grad student, Shannon Russell was her name, and she comes bounding into my office, and we're going to sort of plan a project. I'm sure Shannon's thinking, yeah, we're going to work in E. coli or salmonella diarrhea. I said, hey, Shannon, let's work on asthma. You know, what does a new graduate student say? Okay, sure. And so bless her heart, she bit the dare, and away we went. So we started off with just doing some very simple experiments. We're going to treat mice with antibiotics. There's a mouse asthma model that they all use. And we're going to see, can we affect the outcome of asthma in an experimental model? What we did is we took mice very early in life, or adult mice, and just treat them with antibiotics and then induce asthma. And what we found is that in the early ones, and these are mice that are really young, they're still breastfeeding, if you shift their microbes with antibiotics, they had profound rates of asthma. The guy I worked with at the asthma model, he'd never seen rates like this. Yet if we did it to adult mouse, we didn't see any effect. So, you know, okay, whoopee, we cured mouse asthma. This is a, a major worldwide problem, blah, blah, blah. So we said, well, let's do it in kids. So what we did is we grabbed a cohort of kids, and we did some experiments in these kids. And so there was this cohort of 2,500 Canadian kids, and they'd been looking at roles of asthma in, say, if there's a smoker in the house or a dog in the house kind of things, looking at these risk factors. And I call these guys up and say, hey guys, collect the feces. And they say, oh God, there's Finlay and his feces again kind of thing, Oh, really, collect the feces. So for whatever reason, I don't know why they listened to me, and they started collecting the feces of 3-month-old and 1-year-old kids. Because when we translate the mouse timelines, that's what we were thinking would be an early time period. Then we looked at the feces in these kids at 3 months and 1 year of age. And what we found is the feces of a 3-month-old, so that's a really itty-bitty little baby. 4 microbes, if that kid had those microbes, that kid would not go on to get asthma. If that kid did not have those microbes, that kid was at really high risk for asthma. By the time they got to 1 year, it didn't have any effect. And so we did the really fun experiment where basically we took a germ-free animal, so no microbes in it whatsoever, and we took the feces from a 3-month-old kid that we knew actually went on to get asthma, didn't have those 4 bugs, and we basically put that in this germ-free animal, or we took that same feces and spiked in those 4 bugs and then put it in that animal. And when you put those 4 microbes into the human feces into this mouse, you could actually then block mouse asthma. So that's as close as we are now to actually showing that these things are actually playing a role. But you can see where this can go. You could actually think about a kid, you could test their microbes, and if they don't have these 4, you could think about sort of a probiotic type intervention. We're not there yet, but that's where we're heading to. So what about some of these other problems we talked about? Obesity. We know obesity is a major problem in our society. What we're seeing is, I actually changed this and put a Canadian map there because I had an American map, but it looked too much like a political map of, so I figured, well, we'll stick with Canada to be safe here. It actually does. It's uncanny when you look at obesity rates and political allegiances. I shouldn't say that. Anyway, so obesity has been a problem for a while. Where it's a real problem now is pediatric obesity, childhood obesity. It's just going through the roof. You're seeing these 3-4-year-olds are actually obese. What do microbes have to do with this? The answer is everything. So several years ago, a guy named Jeff Gordon did some really neat experiments. We took a fat mouse and did a fecal transfer into a thin mouse. The thin mouse got fat. He took a thin mouse, did a fecal transfer to fat mouse got thin. He took fat people's feces, put it in thin mice, they got fat. The microbes seem to be controlling this whole thing. That actually makes sense because the microbes break down a lot of what you eat. And we know that in the obese animals and people, the microbes in there are really, really good at generating extra energy per unit of food coming in. They're really good at it. And the microbes from the thin people are actually kind of wussy at it. So there's some really neat stuff coming out in how microbes influence in this whole thing. There's this Israeli friend of mine that started this company. It's called Day 2. What he did is he made a bunch of Israelis wear these glucose monitors around and monitored all the microbes they had and all the food they were eating. Now, if you get a glucose spike, that basically, excess glucose spikes lead to obesity, which then leads to type 2 diabetes. So you don't want glucose spikes with your food. So he mapped all these microbes and all these food types. Based on that, he can now analyze your feces for $300, and he will say, you have these microbes, and based on that, you should eat these foods, And you have those microbes, so based on that, you can eat these. And ironically, some people can eat as much ice cream as they want. They don't get glucose spikes. Others, it just goes through. And each person is different because they have different microbes. The really fun stuff is that when you then compare that head-to-head with the standard diets, Atkins, Weight Watchers, et cetera, it works great. It just blows the others away. So I think we're going to see in the next few years this whole personalized diet kind of thing based on what your microbes are and how they do. Another major disease we're seeing a lot of is inflammatory bowel disease. This is basically inflammation of the gut. This is Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. Basically, your gut is on fire, and it's a really tough disease. But because it's the gut, you can imagine there's microbes associated with this. And they're really starting to make some progress in here. And they've actually been starting to do a lot of fecal transfer experiments. And interestingly, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Well, that actually makes sense because we don't know what the perfect donor is yet. And so when the donor gives it, you're asking these bugs to come in, to put the fire out, your gut's on fire, boot out all the other bad bugs, settle the inflammation down, and take hold. And that's a big ask. So I think the whole thing with IBD right now is we have to figure out whose stool has the magic juice in terms of the bugs that could actually then do this. One other thing that I will say about IBD is the only adverse effect so far correlated with a fecal transfer is a thin woman who had IBD and she had an obese, healthy sister. So obese, healthy sister donated her feces to the thin woman, her sister. She got better. Yay. She also got obese. Bad. So now the sister's suing the other sister for this. So, but that's the only fecal issue. So, an area I know and love that we spend a lot of time on is diarrhea and microbes. And we've already talked a little about C. diff and the microbes. And we've done a lot of experiments in both Salmonella and E. coli showing the microbes will really influence the outcome of disease. And so we're working at this in terms of preventing diarrhea in areas. Probably the most profound area, I think, that this is seeing a lot of interest in is in the brain. I told you that microbes and germ-free, animals that are germ-free, their brains don't develop normally. And there's lots of studies coming out how microbes, you can take a depressed mouse, a stressed mouse, or an anxious mouse, put it into a normal mouse, it will become stressed, anxious, or depressed simply by transferring the microbes. There's lots of studies coming out indicating at this. Autism, which is obviously a very contentious area right now. There's hints at microbes in it. They definitely have different microbes, but autistic kids might be eating differently. There's argument there. There's a few one-offs of fecal transfers where an autistic kid got a fecal transfer, behavior became better. So, and there was just a study out last week where they did fecal transfers on 18 kids and saw a major improvement at 8 weeks in these 18 autistic kids. So again, there's hope that microbes might actually be influencing the brain. So they really are influencing many, many of these childhood diseases. Okay. Well, I think there's only one kid in the audience, or maybe they've even gone by now, one baby. But I want to talk about other aspects of life too, because this is not just about babies. It affects all of us. Here's the top 10 reasons why you're going to die. Take it off the CDC site. Yeah, I know it's a great morbid slide, but whatever. When you look at this list, how many of these are infectious? One, right? Influenza, pneumonia. So that's flu. You get pneumonia. That's infectious. How many of these are actually linked to microbes? Turns out 9 of these 10 diseases now have a microbial link. Heart disease, cancer, lung diseases, all these things here. You may think I'm crazy, but actually there's starting to be some really nice data coming out. Let's take a look at cardiovascular disease. So that's basically if you blow an artery in the brain, you have a stroke. If it's in the body, you have a heart attack. So that's basically heart attacks and strokes combined. And for a long time now, we've known it's been associated with red meat and things like that. Well, what is now being shown is that when you eat red meat, the microbes take something called phosphocholine, a component of red meat, convert it into a molecule, something called TMA. And that's the first step. And then your body takes that molecule in the liver and oxidizes it to something called TMAO. This is what causes atherosclerosis. So if you take a germ-free mouse that has no microbes, you feed as much red meat as you want, it doesn't get atherosclerosis. Vegans and vegetarians have very low rates of this, because they're not eating the red meat. I think the most exciting study was when they actually made enzymes that blocked the microbial enzymes that do that first step, and then tested it in a mouse model. You could actually block it by drugging the bugs. They've been trying to drug the second half, which occurs in your liver, but all the drugs have been toxic and haven't been able to do it. So here's a neat way for two major diseases where there's obviously a microbial component. Probably the funnest experiment I saw these guys do is they convinced a vegan who had never eaten a steak in their life to eat a steak. I don't know how they did that. But anyway, so vegan eats a steak. They measure what happens. What do you think would happen? It turns out that because this person never had steaks, they don't have the microbes to actually do that, so nothing happened. The vegan didn't make the products associated with atherosclerosis because they didn't have the bugs in the first place to do it. So, you know, we talked a little bit of this already about stress and anxiety and depression. This whole mind thing is that, well, I should say the only one on that list I couldn't attribute to microbes or accidents. So you can't say the microbes made me do it, honest. There's a big study just came out of the UK correlating antibiotic use with basically anxiety and depression. Bottom line is more courses of antibiotics, the more anxious and depressed you'll be. Antifungals and antivirals had no effect. So that's, you know, again, I'm sort of pointing to is, we talked about autism and ADHD. Jet lag. I just came back from Europe. It sucks. We all know jet lag. It hurts, right? The same Israeli guy that did the obese diet, this guy's crazy. He basically convinces grad students to go to all these meetings around the world, collect their feces, be jet lagged, and come back, right? And the way he did it, this is great. He flew in business class. So what grad student is going to say no to a quick flight to, you know, Israel to London and back, right? And then you just collect the poop, and what happens? It turns out microbes actually have a big influence on circadian rhythm, which is what jet lag is. And they're actually starting to show that by affecting these microbial composition, you can actually affect circadian rhythm. So I'm dying for the day when you actually take a probiotic before to Europe, you know, and you actually feel normal. So again, you know, this whole gut-brain axis, these microbes are doing it. They're talking to the brain, and the brain's talking to the microbes. While we're on the brain, you know, major issues are degenerative brain diseases. So this is Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. These are very scary diseases, but as our population ages, they're becoming more and more prevalent. Turns out there are actually things you can do that are microbial linked that actually can influence your rate of outcome of these things. There's this diet called the MIND diet, which is basically a modified Mediterranean diet. It's not actually that hard. It's a glass of red wine, you know, and eating the fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts your mother tells you to eat kind of thing. The study had spectacular results. If you ate this kind of a diet, you could decrease your risk of Alzheimer's by 50%. I mean, that is really profound. If you didn't stick to it even perfectly, but you did stick to it, you could basically decrease it by about 25 to 30%. So that says diet plays a big role in dementia and Alzheimer's. As I said, these are Western diseases, and it turns out the lowest rates of dementia and Alzheimer's are actually in rural India, which obviously has a higher microbial rate there. Here's a fun little study I found. If you remember anything from this talk, just brush your teeth. If you brush your teeth 3 times a day, you can see the numbers here, that you can drop it by 22 to 65% of getting dementia. They didn't say anything about dental floss, so I can't help you there. And then they also had this really nice twin study where one twin had good oral health and the other had poor oral health. And the one with the poor oral health had much, much higher rates of dementia. So what does that why is good oral health? Well, it turns out the biggest problem with aging is what we call inflammaging, this low-grade inflammation in our body. And so if you have poor oral health, all these microbes are seeping through your gums, and your body is then getting inflamed. And this basically contributes to many of the effects of aging, especially dementia and Alzheimer's. So, moral of the story is, brush your teeth. Can't hurt, right? And studies say it actually might do something. Okay, let's finish up with a bit more practical stuff for those of you who do have kids, and talk about what we might do. Okay, if microbes are important, how do we fix it? What can we do about it, to do this? So I think that the trick is to think of a balance. So obviously, we've come a long ways of preventing kids of dying of infections. That's great. The hygiene actually works, and that's been important, and it's done really well. But we realize, I think we've tipped the scales too far, and we now have to basically bring it back that these kids do have to be exposed to the microbes that they're used to getting exposed to. We've evolved with these things and allow this healthy exposure. Okay, when does it start? It starts when the mother's pregnant. And there's all sorts of neat things coming out showing that these microbes in the mother are actually affecting how the fetus develops inside in the mother. For example, if you're a thin mother in third trimester, and you say, oh, I'm pregnant, I can gain 500 pounds. For once in my life, I don't have to diet, and all this, and you gain more weight than you should. Third trimester mothers, their microbes are already going towards obese because that gives them more energy to drive the fetus. Remember I told you they need more energy. If you really overeat, you really drive your microbes to obesity. When the kid is born, that kid inherits the mother's microbes. That kid stands a much higher chance of being obese, even though the mother was thin to begin with, just by the mother's microbes. We talked a lot about the first birthday present and the big gulp on the way out. This is really important because the microbes the kid acquires, these are the ones that actually break down breast milk. These are the ones that feed the kid. And the vaginal microbes, they're beneficial. They're like probiotic bugs. So it's really important to get acquired to this. And we're working with a company now that it's becoming rather popular in some circles to, if you have to have a C-section, you do a vaginal swab, which is just like it sounds. You swab out the vagina, kid is born, and then you smear the microbes all over the mice and things like this to try and inoculate that kid with this. The studies are not long enough yet to know whether it works or not, but it's underway, and naturopaths are routinely doing this. Breastfeeding, I've already told you, we always know breastfeeding is better. We've always thought because it had mother's antibodies in there, for example. Well, we now know that in breast milk, most of breast milk, our bodies can't break down. We don't have the enzyme to do it. We rely on those microbes that the kid acquired upon birth to actually break down the breast milk. And more recently, there's a bunch of studies now showing that, that there's actually microbes in breast milk that are actually involved in colonizing the kid and doing it. So interestingly, it's got all the formula companies scrambling now, how can we, improve formula to put these kinds of things in here. Okay, kids starting to grow up, what do? One on the left, binky, soother, what do you want to call it? Parents use this all the time, pacifier, right? You put it in the kid's mouth, what do the kids do? Spit it out, right? Put it back in, real fun game. Spit it out, it goes on the floor. Here's a shopping center, what do? Well, I found a study that these parents have two choices. You can go into the washroom and wash it off and put it back in the kid, or you just put it in your own mouth and shovel it back in the kid. If you put it in your own mouth and shovel it in the kid's face, those kids have much less asthma, obesity, and allergies than if you run to the washroom and wash it off. So it saves a trip, guys. You can, especially for guys, because we're lazy, just shut up, kid, kind of thing. I love that picture there. Here's a better picture here. Here we go. It's on the stand. Advanced, kills the most germs, kills more than 99.9% of germs, leaves the hands feeling soft. Chuck it. This is poison. You guys should not be using this. All the studies show it doesn't work. And the FDA is actually, triclosan is the active ingredient in this. It actually has just banned it because there's no studies to show this actually works. So you go to a playground, every diaper bag has got one of these hanging off of it, right? I mean, you don't need to do this. Soap and water is all you need. And also, when you use this on your hands, you're actually killing off all the good microbes and increasing the chance of bad one coming in and being able to colonize. So you got rid of the competitors that were good in the first place. So throw the hand sanitizer on. I'm going to make your life easy. You don't even have to do that. Just maybe wash the kids' hands before dinner, but that's it. Kids. What do kids do? They get dirty, right? I mean, Hoover and kids, they just love to eat dirt and play in the dirt and everything. So if dirt exposure was so bad, don't you think as a species we would have evolved not to get dirty all the time? And what does a kid do? Puts everything possible in the mouth, right? They just hoover everything. Why? My argument is they're trying to get some of the microbes from the world, and we're trying, no, don't put that in your mouth, please, no, don't chew in that stick kind of thing. So, maybe there's a reason to it. Okay, here's one I really like. Get a dog. What do dogs do? They do two things. They roll around in the dirt, especially if they can find some feces and everything else, and they get really dirty, right? Then they come bounding into the house, and they roll all over the kid and lick the kid and everything, right? Turns out that if you get a dog and you have a young kid in the house, you decrease that kid's chance of getting asthma by 20%, and you also decrease the chances of obesity of that kid, just by the simple fact of having this dog. Cat lovers, what do you think? Sorry, guys. Cats just sit in the corner, they go like this, and they're not licking the kid. There's no data either way. Cats don't improve or disprove. That's because they don't think they interface with the kids as much. So, that, anyway, I don't mean to insult cat lovers. I get in trouble here, I know. So, okay, how do you change your microbes? The easiest way is what you eat. The expression is you are what you eat. I argue your microbes are what you eat. So we eat a lot of white flour and white sugar now, right? These are processed foods. They're actually absorbed by the body really quickly in the upper intestine, the small intestine, because you don't have to break these things down. So you get this great meal, McDonald's or whatever, and it's going there. Most of it is absorbed long before it ever gets to where the microbes are, which is way down in the gut. So ironically, your mother was right. Eat your vegetables and nuts and legumes and high fiber. Not so much for the nutrients, but for you're actually feeding the microbes. And all the studies show that this more of a healthy diet and decreased red meat and things is actually feeding the microbes to actually allow them to do their thing. So this is an experiment we did in the lab, and each of those colors is different microbes in an untreated and then different mice treated with 2 different antibiotics. Antibiotics drastically impact on the microbes. The average kid in the US gets 10 to 12 courses of antibiotics by the time they get to school. The reason that's a problem is early in life these microbes are bouncing around, and if you have an antibiotic, you shift that kid's microbes. They come back a bit, but not the same. And then you hit them again, it goes further like this, and by 10, 12 courses, these microbes are over here. Antibiotics, we all know about the causing resistance to the use of them. What we now know is they're actually not harmless. And so you have to balance them. If the kid is dying of bacterial infection, of course you use antibiotics. But if the kid has a viral ear infection, antibiotics don't work against viruses, wait 24 hours and see what's happening. The biggest crime in antibiotics, in the US and Canada, 80% of our antibiotic use is used in agriculture, because that gives you a 15% increase in growth weight. They banned it in Europe. But the problem is that gives a 15% increase in growth in any animal, pigs, sheep, fish, whatever, cows, you name it. And the studies show humans. So maybe the success of antibiotic use in our world has actually influenced the major obesity epidemic we're seeing. So if you've followed me so far and you're starting to buy in, maybe these microbes are important, here's an interesting concept. Every generation, our society gets cleaner. Every generation, we have less and less diverse microbes to choose from. You cannot go back to have the microbes your great-great-grandfather or grandmother had. You can't get them. Well, unless they're alive and hey, give me a sample kind of thing. But, every generation, so maybe we need to rethink these guys. These are actually endangered species. We've evolved with these microbes, yet we're bunning them like crazy. We can't go back. We don't have the answer, but maybe we've got to rethink this about, because we evolved with these things. They're designed for us, and we know we have these things. And so, interesting thoughts. Finally, I have to put a plug in for vaccines. There's been an awful lot of misinformation and malinformation on this. All the data, vaccines work. The whole autism was fraudulent and it's been completely disproven and everything. And if you do have kids, do the vaccines. It's really, there's been a recent political appointment, someone to reevaluate vaccines in the States by a vaccine denier. That is going to cost a lot of kids' lives. The first Bush did the experiment when they banned the whooping cough vaccine. Lots of kids died because it just came roaring back. And so I think we've got to remember that vaccines are a really wonderful tool for many diseases. So this is a book that I've written with a co-author, postdoc of mine, Claire Arietta. And this is a book that's for sale back there that really takes us through all this. It's designed so the science is behind it, but it's designed that anyone can read. It's not technical. It's made for the person. And the nice thing I think about this book is we seem to have got the balance right. The pediatricians agree with it, and even the naturopaths agree with it. So the whole balance thing. And it's full of helpful hints on how to do the kid. There's chapters on asthma, obesity, diabetes, and many other diseases that affect all of us in our life. And I'll refer you to the website, letthemeatdirt.com. We put up a bunch of information there if you're interested in this. And if you're going to ask about probiotics, there's a really nice link. Just click on the probiotics. It'll take you to the clinical studies that show which probiotics work for what disease. There's a few they work, but most of them they don't. So I will stay on around afterwards, and maybe we'll sell a few books and sign these things. And so finally, I guess I want to leave you with a message. This is Seattle. It's like Vancouver. Rains a lot. I thought this was an appropriate picture here. We need to let kids be kids, experience their world, because they have to do that to pick up their microbes, and then be healthy. Thanks a lot.
So thank you, Dr. Finlay. We have a few minutes for questions.
Hey, thanks. This was really interesting. So are there any circumstances where you would recommend like an alcohol-based sanitizer? Like if I'm camping or something, I have no running water, maybe I'm digging cat holes and stuff.
Yeah, that's the whole hygiene question, that if you are at daycare and everyone's squirting, everyone got diarrhea and things, definitely wash the hands. So this works for the hygiene kind of concept of it, but just for daily maintenance, the answer is no, it doesn't do it at all. So use it, if you're in a hospital setting, for example, there's a reason that they use hand sanitizer there, but we honestly don't need it here, really. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
It's a good question.
Do you foresee the development of a ideal series of biome cocktails that are designed so that you give this within 24 hours of birth, you give that one within X number of weeks, you have that one within X number of months, so that kids will have a idealized biome in their gut?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm going to call it probiotics 2.0 kind of thing. I co-founded a company in Boston that's doing exactly that. They're doing the vaginal recolonization. They're thinking about screening if you got risk for asthma or not. You could then repopulate these things. The thing about probiotics is that they're often from the vagina and you're putting them in the gut. They don't stick. There's a reason they say you have to take 10 billion things a day, because they just flush through you. So I think in the future it'll be a pill that contains 20 different microbes from the gut for the gut, and we know these microbes have this particular benefit. So we repopulate the whole ecological system with these microbes. So yeah, I think probiotics of the future are very exciting. We're still early days on identifying which microbes are going to give us this particular benefit. This field is only really about 7 to 10 years old, so it's really gearing up. But I think we're going to see major changes in this area. And it's a lot easier to give a probiotic than, we can't do gene therapy now, for example. So I think we're going to see a lot of that. Yeah.
So my question is, do you have any advice for adults with some of the conditions you mentioned?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the similar concepts apply. So diet is a major thing. I think things like asthma, that's because it's early life immune system. I haven't seen any data that later in life you can affect asthma. But things like IBD, for example, obesity, diabetes, there's some neat stuff coming out. Even things like cancer chemotherapy, there's some beautiful studies coming out now that they can tell whether you respond to chemo or not, depending what microbes you have, and they can actually predict with these things. So yeah, I'm toying with writing a book, the other end of life as we age, and I've been studying this a lot, but there are certainly, probiotics are not going to hurt. You can take those kind of things. I think, diet and exercise is a major component because both of those influence the microbes. And it depends on certain conditions, and pay attention to literature because it's coming fast. There's a lot of stuff coming out. Well, you got to filter it and look at, there's a lot of quackery out there too, and do that. But it is certainly coming. Yeah.
Cool, thanks.
Yep.
Hi. Is there any interesting data around like when kids are in daycare versus home or versus growing up in a village versus city?
Yeah, there certainly is. It's interesting that this whole hygiene hypothesis, the idea we're too clean early, that was discovered by realizing that the younger siblings had less disease and stuff than the older ones because the older kids brought all this stuff home to them. So there's no data to say that getting infections in kids is good for kids. Like you don't have to get them infections. But there's no doubt that when a kid hits daycare, if any of you have done that, immediately you're going to have a year of colds, and you and your kids are going to suffer. But yes, you can see shifts in their microbes. The question I'm wondering is, okay, so you're a mother and you have a kid by C-section and you have mastitis, you can't breastfeed, and you live on the 22nd floor of a condo in an urban setting, and you have no pets, and your daycare's down the door, down the hall. I wonder how are these kids going to get sort of normal things. So generally speaking, daycare is a good way of mixing up the microbes, except when the infections come, and that's when it just rips through the daycare. So yeah, you can certainly tell. Microbes are a real read of the environment. Like we can tell in the feces whether the family has a dog or not, because you have dog microbes in there. That's easy to see, and we can tell what kind of dog it is based on the microbial composition. And not that you need to, but so the environment really does influence, and so. There's a lot of studies coming out that daycare sort of enhances this whole community exposure to microbes because you do get different microbes than if you're just solely staying at home and never see another kid. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, neat question.
So you didn't show the map, but you didn't show the map, but you alluded to the fact that there is a correlation between, say, obesity rates and demographics and possibly political inclinations.
I'm not going there.
Maybe not, but I'm kind of curious why that actually is. Is it because, people in certain parts of the country wash their hands more, use hand sanitizer, or is it nutrition, or
It's
do we not know?
nutrition, it's
nutrition.
diet and exercise is what epidemiologists attribute it to. And major high-fat diet and lack of exercise in the southern areas of the states, for example. And yeah, that's what they claim. I have not seen a hand sanitizer, like, does, southern U.S. use more or less hand sanitizer than the north? I don't know about that. I don't think it's that. I think it's just the whole environment these people are living in. Yeah.
Thanks very much for your talk.
Thanks.
I'm a weight loss surgery patient, and I'm very interested to know your opinion on that particular perspective. I've had to switch myself to probiotics.
Right.
But, wasn't really any discussion before going into the surgery that you're going to be changing your microbial levels and stuff.
Yep.
And so I'm very interested to know if there's like studies out there on that or anything like that.
They're just coming out. I've seen several now recently that, bariatric surgery really does affect the microbes because you're really taking out pieces of the intestine in that sense. What that means in terms of health complications down the line, I have not seen any. I think it's still early days in that sense. But there's no doubt you do shift the microbes anytime you do something to the intestine. And you're right, a lot of the probiotics, as I say, they can't hurt. They seem to help digestion and things. And there's, pouchitis, for example, there's some nice data that probiotics seem to actually decrease that, for example. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm wondering about probiotics, including a small number of identified microbes, versus broad-spectrum natural exposure.
Right.
How many different microbes do we have? How many different microbes does someone who's living in natural conditions in the Amazon have? And what are the chances that we can identify the microbes that matter?
So that's all where the research is right now. There's about 1,000, generally it's about 1,000 species of microbes in your gut, and each person, I said, is different. There's about 300 or so in your mouth that are different. The skin, there's probably about 100 or so different ones. With respect to the Amazon of things, there's been some very interesting studies done on the microbes of these people who have very little exposure to the outside world. And their microbes are very different, but their diet is very different too. And actually, one anthropologist was so convinced he did it, he gave himself a fecal transfer with this primitive, if you want to call it that, feces, and he just got severe diarrhea, and he got into real trouble in that sense. So that experiment didn't work. But you're right. So the idea is, can you biobank, really? Can we save the good ones? Okay, these ones are good. We need these things. And there's groups that are certainly working at that, and that's really where the research is right now to, biobank this diversity of these microbes, and try and figure which ones are important. Yeah.
Thanks for the talk. It was very enjoyable.
Good, thanks.
So my first question is, how literally should we take the title of your book in the following sense? So my spouse was a big proponent of home vegetable gardens for my daughter when she was very young, and she seems to be doing very well now.
Yeah,
and
good.
So is there a benefit to actually eating fruits, vegetables that are semi-unwashed and so forth? And my second question was related to one of the maps you showed about asthma. It looked like globally it was a Western world problem, except for Brazil. And
we'll do that. Brazil's a great story. Yeah. Okay, so title, let kids eat the microbes that are found within the dirt sometimes to help replenish, and we'll never make a title, right? So it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, They'll never get a bestseller to that. So it's a bit tongue-in-cheek. I think we can safely say that, if a kid picks up a handful of dirt today, it's much safer than a handful of dirt 100 years ago. We had cholera, smallpox, all these other nasty things. So it's safer in that sense. And but a lot of data is starting to show that as a kid, you pull carrots out, scrape the dirt off most of it, and then you just chew on it, right? And you can taste the dirt and things. You're getting good microbial exposure there. That's probably good for them. I would say if a kid's, let the kid play in the sandbox, unless there's cat feces there, and then don't, because that has parasites in it, for example. Or lick the floor of your house, that's okay, but not the subway station, that's probably not okay, kind of thing. So it's a balance. I've not seen any studies of actually ramming dirt down a kid's mouth and saying, this is good for you or not.
But more the unwashed carrot variety, right?
Yeah. I think that's really good, and that's another way of microbial exposure. The Brazil story. So you picked it up. There's Brazil was bright red for asthma too, and the question is, well, why? Because you don't associate it with being a fully developed country yet. Turns out in Brazil, C-sections are a rage. So about 80% of people in Brazil get C-sections, and about 95% of the women in Rio de Janeiro get C-sections. Part of that is it's trendy. It's cool to have your little bikini scar kind of thing. But also the other part is the obstetricians are unionized, and their union says you don't do night call. So if you want to deliver a kid, you've got to do it during daylight hours, so I don't have to get up at night and deliver this thing. So it's going to be very interesting to follow what happens to all these kids that are born by C-section, because we're going to see the cohorts of them. And so there's a big movement now to try and convince these obstetricians that maybe kids, maybe you do have to get up in the night and do a normal vaginal delivery sometimes for the health of these kids. I don't know if that's why Brazil is so high, but we know that C-sections really increase ASA rates. I'm sure that contributes to it. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Hi. You talked a lot about health and eating, and that you can eat healthy to improve, the outcomes and so forth. But are there specific foods that are linked to healthy microbes that you should eat more of, other than just healthy ones?
Yes, and the answer, it's all the ones that grow in that picture. It is the plants, it's the legumes, the nuts, just the highly complex, unprocessed foods. As I was saying, white sugar, white flour, processed meats. These are at the other end of the spectrum in terms of driving obesity-type microbes. And like I say, the stuff that's being done with day 2 about personalized diets, showing which foods are good and bad for each person. Generally speaking, the moral of the story is, it's an old story, but now we know it's the microbes, not just because it used to be you'd eat your lettuce because it gives you vitamins and things. Now we also show that it actually twists your microbes in a much more beneficial way. So I think the whole Western diet is the worst diet we can have for microbes when you actually look at it. And the better diets are the more plant and legume-based type things. People eat a lot of beans and things like this. There's a book called The Blue Zones, which is areas in the world where people live forever, like centurions, 100 years, super centurions, 105 years. And what these people have in common is they have social contacts. Their 80-year-old daughter looks after their 100-year-old parent. They have families. Or they also have exercise. They walk down to the town center to play cards with their buddies or whatever all the time. And they don't eat very much red meat, and they eat a lot of legumes and things. And they have a pig roast once a year for New Year's. That's okay, but you don't have to eat as much the meat type thing. And that is a trend of these 7 areas around the world. That's what they all have in common. So I think diet's going to see a major resurgence as we realize, some of the other reasons why you actually need to think about what you eat. But for sure, what you think of healthy eating, that's actually gives you healthy microbes. The data shows that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very interesting talk. Thank you very much for coming today.
Thanks.
I have a 13-month-old, so that's probably
Excellent.
why
You're
I'm
living
keenly focused on this right now. One quick comment. I heard no mention of one of the things that was highlighted when we were sort of preparing for her arrival, which was a new focus, or relatively new focus, on early skin-to-skin contact with the mother. You mentioned the sort of vaginal swabs, but I was a little surprised not to hear that mentioned.
Most of the beneficial, there's some on the skin, but not as many as in the vagina, for example. So the studies are unclear right now so far, should you immediately latch on the breast for a microbial exposure kind of thing. A lot of people are starting to think that, but the data's not strong yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
What I really wanted to ask is, I had a parent recently tell me that eating the same thing with the child was a negative for the child in terms of tooth decay because our flora was so different. And, if I took a bite of something that she was taking then a bite of, that really surprised me. And I was
just
hoping you would.
Just buy the book, okay?
Yeah.
Makes a good first shower present, yeah.
So no evidence you've heard of ever to support that.
No.
And one of the other things I've wondered is there a point at which it becomes less important to have this sort of, to let them eat dirt?
Yeah,
How early
about
is it?
5 years of age is kind of then, it obviously influences all of us at all ages, but really I call them the bookends of life, 0 to 5 and then 65 plus. That's when the microbes seem to have an even more. Then middle life, it's things like diabetes and obesity, and then the just standard physical being type things that they seem to play a role. But the early life, because you're setting it up, and the later life, I think your immune system goes wonky and the bugs go wonky. So.
Awesome. So I still got some time with her then.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's still hope.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, so thank you very much again.
Thank you very much.